Welcome to From Stuck to Scaled Growth Strategies for Small and Mid-Sized Businesses, your guide to navigating growth, transformation, and success in today's ever-changing business landscape. Each week, we'll dive into proven strategies, real-world case studies, and actionable insights designed to help small and mid-sized business owners scale smart, lead stronger, and grow faster. Let's get you unstuck and on the path to sustainable, scalable success. Now your host, Julio Gonzalez.
Welcome back to From Stuck to Scaled. I'm your host, Julio Gonzalez, and in this episode, we'll explore how leaders can rebuild trust and alignment, especially in times of pressure and change. Our guest, Hanna Bauer, shares her transformative insights on the importance of leading with vulnerability and how embracing the element of heart can propel organizations to new heights. Tune in as we uncover the vital lessons that can help you and your team thrive and scale effectively, even when facing challenges. Let's help welcome Hanna to the show. Hanna, it's great to have you here.
Oh my goodness. Thanks so much for having me, Julio.
Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your company.
Well, sure. Well, I am a leadership strategist, and what I help do, I get hired to help leaders who don't just want to do the thing, but they want to do the right thing and do it right. So meaning that it has to align with purpose, with their ethics, with their values, but then also have a methodology to do it. So that's where the processes and systems come in. So we do transformation through love and excellence, which is, again, taking up your leadership lid so that you can both lead great people and great processes so that we can accomplish great things through innovation.
That's awesome. And your company is called HEARTnomics. And I know that there's a story behind that. So why don't you tell us about that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. The root of HEARTnomics, again, is both the economy of the heart, meaning that, yes, work is profitable and there is an economy to it. And I came to learn that actually as a kid battling heart disease. At the time, it was considered terminal. Most people don't think, well, that kids have heart disease, and usually it's a disease is found later on in life if it comes. And in my case, I was running with that. I was running in a very, let's say, hopeless in a sense, because there was no clear pathway to be able to even treat the heart at the age of 4 when I started having problems. And later on, even the interventions that were tried, the different drugs, different treatments, heart procedures, open heart surgery, those didn't work. Even the opportunity for a pacemaker was not even an option for me. So a lot of what my methodology came from is from those times, in that hospital bed where everything seemed out of control, right? I had no way to control internally what was happening, because my heart would just suddenly go into super fast beats with tachycardia. And then it would also go into very abnormal, lethal rhythms called arrhythmia. So internally, I felt out of control, and externally as well, because there was no clear what we're going to do next. There was no like, hey, let's do, if we try this, or if you do this, just stay away from this and then it won't happen. There was none of that. I mean, I would go into this lethal rhythms by a sneeze, by bending over, just talking, or in the middle of my sleep. So uncertainty and I, became very good friends from a very young age. But that's honestly what led me later on, as I was stepping into the world. I had this basically, yes, Hanna, now you're well, now you're good, and didn't really know where to start. Went back to the beginning for me, the hospital, and really started looking at the lessons that I learned there. But also later on, as a leader and an entrepreneur, I did catch something that a lot of things started feeling very eerie. And that's where my methodology really came into play, because I realized that a lot of the stuck moments, the moments that felt like survival, really felt like heart disease and heart attacks, just the way I felt them when I was a kid.
So obviously, your heart issues have informed your business, and it sounds like you've kind of structured your business from those experiences. What are some of those activities that you would say, you execute? What are some of those practices? How do they look?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, is understanding in leadership, and as we're looking at solutions, you have to look at things systematically. For example, a lot of people couldn't tell I had a heart disease. It just, you'll look at somebody like, oh, they have a heart. You can tell somebody has a cold. But how did the heart disease express itself? Well, I couldn't breathe. not knowing really what was happening, I was being treated even for lung problems, and I didn't have a lung problem. I had a heart problem, but it was being expressed through inability of breathing, like, whenever
Right,
you're out of
right.
breath. So if not looking at the whole person systematically, you can start looking at a wrong system to try to come up with a solution, when in reality it was the heart. The other part, it didn't only affect when I was going through these rhythms, it didn't just affect my heart. It wasn't just it was beating bad. Think about when your heart goes fast, you start getting foggy, your um,
Sure.
ability to make decisions becomes very blurry. And the same thing again, people may think, oh, I need to take concentration classes, so I need to go focus. And it's not that. Again, I can do that. Yes. It helped me get through a very tough moment. Yes. Learning to breathe helped me get through those moments. Yes. But at the end, I still had a heart problem. And that is the same thing that happens in the business. I realize a lot of times what we consider is a income problem, it's a turnover problem, it's a mistake defect problem, and we start looking at that and try to fix that, and with being blindsided by the other systems that really may be the root problem that comes in. So what I do and how that this impacts, having that systematic understanding, not only that the system but also the processes. For example, in order to treat my heart disease, they would try different drugs. Well, the drug didn't just impact my heart, right? That's what I had to say in the hospital. The drug had side effects. Every solution we introduce into a business has side effects, and
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
need to know what those side effects are. So for me, how it impacts is the way that I help organizations diagnose, looking at what we're doing. It may be expressing itself in a way, so we'll look in through that, but understanding that really is a systematic perhaps dysfunction that's happening, even in, for example, especially when we introduce technology tools that in essence amplify really a lot of the problems that were already there. Um, and we start looking at things in a process, systematic way, in a triage. I mean, if you can't breathe right now, I can't try to find a cure for heart disease. I need to get you breathing. So we'll look at what's that immediate leakage that is causing that problem. Many times is lack of sales. We need to get money flowing, or expenses are unknown. We need to cut the expenses. We need to stop the bleeding so that we can regulate and understand where that's going. But also initially, we cannot give what we don't have. So
Right.
my solutions specifically deal with keeping the leader, the people, the asset well, so that we can then perform. So internal alignment for external execution. So I will not just like, oh, let's look at the processes, systems, and all that, but really let's look at the people first, in alignment with what's going with where we're going, so that we can see the misalignment that's going on everywhere else.
I love that. And, the analogy that came to mind, and this is something that terrifies me, is roof leaks. I've
Mhm.
had roof leaks, in my homes, my entire life for whatever reason. And a roof leak is never where it drips. A roof
Yes.
leak can start, much further, up or across, whatever, and the water finds its way to where it leaks. Same thing happens, to your point, in business. It's not just looking at the problem where it materializes, but what's
Mhm.
behind that problem, and where does it originate. You have to look much broader than
Yes.
just at the problem, at its face value.
Yeah.
um, when you're working with leaders, how do you approach that wellness, and making sure that they are effective? And I mean, there's so much that's behind
Yeah.
that leader. How do you approach that leader?
Well, a lot of times, I mean, it starts with the awareness part, right? I mean, a leader will likely be aware. How are they aware? It just turns out many times they have lost the passion that they had at one time for what they did. The burnout, which we hear is not, it's over 70% of the professionals are experiencing burnout. And let me tell your audience, for those listeners, people are listening, heart disease feels just like burnout. This is from a heart disease patient having experienced both. So you think about it, a lot of the leaders feel stuck because of the lack of decision making. Just like I told you, when I was going through heart disease, one of the things that I couldn't do was make decisions. My brain was blocked. It was fogged. And it's the same thing. Expecting the very thing that we rely on leaders to do is to make decisions, asking them to make them and expecting them to make them at a time when it's burnout. It's adding, in a sense, sometimes trauma over trauma.
Hmm.
So that's where I get to help. And really, that comes out of conversation. Sometimes, again, it expresses in different ways. It might express in performance. It expresses already having had a health scare. And then, hey, they stepped away from the role and nobody else could do what they were doing. So over reliance. So now I can't even step away. I can't even be sick. I can't, because everything will fall apart. So even those parts, in coming up with those conversations, really understanding what's going on with the leader. I do a lot of the executive coaching. I don't really like to call it coaching, because I believe what I do is a strategy aspect, because there's really the decision points. There's a lot of, you already are operating in what you're already operating in your genius zone, but there's some clear decisions that need to come up from that. I'm a black belt in Six Sigma, so that's a continuous improvement. And what we do with that, for those of you that may not have heard of Six Sigma, is where we get to 99.999% accuracy. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking to catch, where are in what we call defects, or, basically failures, where are the failure points. And the other part we're looking at is where can we cut to be able to streamline and be more effective. So the whole point is to be more effective, more efficient. And that is also the approach that I take to whenever I'm working with a leader, because I realize our leaders are carrying a lot. And really what we need to work on is keeping the vital part. That was actually the innovative surgery. Obviously, I'm alive. But it was in 1992 that I became the recipient of the first heart ablation. And it was a collaboration between the hospitals. It was completely research at the time. And I honestly didn't even know the impact until 20 years later, when the hospital called me because they were going to do a documentary. And
Wow.
they were celebrating because 3,000 other kids had been saved from the surgery. And now is the way that heart disease is being treated. So it wasn't like I knew that. It was like I was a recipient of it. I was very happy. I knew they had done a lot of research in me, in my heart, and trying to get to that cure. And again, there was a lot of failure points. So I had, I would say, an unhealthy relationship with failure up until really when I was able to look back and see really that wasn't failure. It's just part of the process. And that's also what I help leaders with. Is let's look into that. How are we learning in the organizations? How are we catching that? How are we catching those learning moments that express themselves as failures?
Hannah, I've never asked this question of a guest. I'm on almost 52 episodes at this point.
Mm,
But, when you were talking about the pressures and, I
mm,
had a lunch meeting and we were talking about, the challenges that women face in leadership.
mm.
Um, Business for women, I think is much stronger, much harder rather,
Yeah.
because you have more pressures that frankly us men don't pick up, right?
Yes.
You have the burden of, taking care of children, and,
Yes.
statistically you have the burden of caring for aging parents. What do
Yes.
you see from a women in leadership perspective, that you could tell the men, go help your women?
Well, first of all, I want to give kudos to the hospital that did the surgery, because I have 5 children. So obviously, if I haven't had another heart attack by now, they did a really good job. Anybody having 4 teenagers at one time, or even 3 in diapers, whew, my heart did well. So yes, I totally understand. As a mom, as an entrepreneur, leading and having dreams of my own, it's been challenging. And here was the part that I really had to learn to embrace, and that was embracing the season I was in. And as a woman, right, I needed to learn to embrace that season. There were things I was not going to be able to do. And
Of
the
course.
shaming, the guilting that I did a really good job myself. Not even have to hear from somebody, but all of these stories I would have about, how offensive, even being pregnant and having to go to a serious board meeting. So, I mean, those are things that just go in your head. And I really had to come to terms with both the amazing opportunity that I had really to another human being that is being developing not only inside of me, but later on I had to be entrusted, be the steward of this human being growing up, but really honor that. And that was, and I did have to come to terms because there was a lot of things like, oh man, I felt bad because yes, I did want to go and do that pitch. And yes, I do know what the solution is for that. And yes, I did see my male counterparts be able to do those things that I didn't get to do because I had to make sure I was being home. Like I had to feed the kids and I had to later on, I wanted to be there for the baseball games, the wrestling, the football and all that part, So, and it wasn't just going there. Then you have to be also a team mom. So making sure everybody in the team gets fed. It wasn't just your kids. So I will say one for that woman that is going through right now is embracing and knowing your season. There was a time where I did step down. I had to go back to really putting the main thing be the main thing because I knew at the end of the day, that's really what mattered was the legacy. And my legacy wasn't just going to reflect in my bank account. My legacy just wasn't going to be reflected on that next deal or that newest partnership. My legacy was going to start first at home. You cannot get what you don't have. And my leadership had to be impacted at home. And I would say that to my male counterparts too. Your leadership is at home matters first. So that would say the same thing for dads. For male leaders is again servant leadership. Servant leadership is one of the main things. So as a servant leader, a male servant leader serving with other female leaders is really understanding how can I best support the leaders in the moment in the season that they're in so that we can all continue moving forward because it's true. We collaborate. There's different times. There's different things. I understand with support that I needed or even understanding. And it wasn't like they were going to, they couldn't come home and make dinner for me, so that I could be available for that one meeting that was very important. But what we did have to work around is understanding the flexibility that needed to happen. And again, main thing is the alignment is, and as long as we understood what the main thing was the main thing, then we would be able to be okay. I made the decision, like I said, to step out on certain times, especially when I was going through harder things. But one thing I did do as a CEO, for example, is I had a play area for our employees. I had even for teenagers. I created like even a Wii station and computer things. So I made it inviting for the people to be able to do that because a lot of my workers were female, that single moms that had kids in middle school. That had kids in usually middle school. There's not really an ASP, an after school care, like there is for elementary school, and not really old enough to be at home, because they were in high school. So having a place that not only catered to be engaging for the kids was important to be able to retain talent. So I would say that as well, thinking, being innovative, and how can you best serve your key leaders, you're actually everyone in your organization so that you can retain talent and really continue to innovate.
So you're listening to the From Stuck to Scale podcast, and we're speaking with Hanna Bauer around managing and growing through tough situations. So Hanna, what are some of those mistakes that business leaders make when trying to scale, when they're under so much pressure?
Well, the thing is with under pressure, what happens? We get stressed, right? There's good stress, there's bad stress. But think about pressure. Pressure is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, we use pressure for what? We use pressure for testing. Pressure, it doesn't make something. Pressure reveals what's already there. So understanding that, first of all, what's your relationship with pressure? Is it a healthy relationship? I mean, think about it. Anytime like you do something with the car, you go pressure test, right? Even to test the heart, for anybody who's healthy, an athlete, what do? A stress test, because during that you're able to see other things that maybe weren't caught before are now come to the surface. So it's the same thing as understanding when that pressure is there. Do I have the mechanisms in place to be able to catch these? And if those things that they're completely new by surprise, they're like, where did that come from? How can you catch those? And how does it impact your mission? How is it impact the vision? Or is it things that, hey, what I'm making a big deal of may not be a big deal of after all? Things that I honestly just need to release. Not everything that rises your pressure, that's creating pressure, isn't necessarily true. Like I mentioned, even for me, I was creating a lot of pressure in my head, even being pregnant and going to the board meeting. Nobody ever said that. It was stories in my head that I was putting pressure on. So it's like the stories in my head. And I think that's a lot of us. Pressure also brings out these stories in our head that we really don't have evidence for. So I will say, in times of pressure, is your friend, collect the evidence and come into a healthy relationship with that evidence. See what's needed, see what's not needed. But pressure is your friend. It's the only way you're really going to know what's going on. Again, it's meant to reveal you and not to take you down. On the contrary, this is where your greatest moments come.
And it's understanding that pressure, right? Because not all
Yes.
pressure is bad.
No.
And some people thrive, under the right types of pressure. People that procrastinate, often work best under pressure, under a tight deadline.
Yeah.
And it's getting to that point that brings out the best in them. And like when you're speaking to others, the butterflies that you get in your stomach,
Yeah.
that's your body telling you it's time to step up.
Yeah.
That is absolutely a pressure moment,
Yeah.
and your body's telling you, this is happening and it's okay. It's using that pressure, and that fear, that
Mhm.
stress to your benefit.
Absolutely. But the problem comes in is that we never bring it down.
Yes.
That was me with tachycardia. The tachycardia, your heart going fast, is actually a good thing. When you're running, you need your heart to go fast. If your heart doesn't go fast, that's also a problem. So pressure is good, but you also need to be able to bring it down as a leader, understanding how do I decelerate as well with my team? How do I cause it not to break? Because again, you need pressure those times to perform, right? It's when it's mission critical and you have to be there. You can't be there 100% of the time, but you do have to be there 100% at the right time. So in that part, understanding that yes, we're going to go all hands on deck, but there also has to be also that hope, that relief of when we're not, and we have to be able to know the difference.
And how do you coach your customers around being vulnerable, right? Because as much as, we're leaders and we have to be tough, there has to be a vulnerability there also, because things happen, and every day, right? And our employees. So how do you coach around vulnerability?
By being excellent. I mean, we're called to be excellent. We're not calling to be perfect. When we're excellent, we're also looking at the current state. And to be vulnerable, to look at the current state in order for me to get honest feedback on what's going on is going to take vulnerability. So here's the thing, even when we do transformation tables, when we do feedback is, the leader goes first. So people are not going to do what you say. People are going to do what they see. So in that sense, invulnerability is, yes, getting out of your comfort zone and not only owning up, being responsible, talking about it, being the first one to go, understanding this is current state and understanding the purpose of it. And so that we cannot change what we don't know. We cannot grow what we don't measure. And for that, I'm going to need honest feedback. And that's going to require vulnerability, starting with me.
And do you find most of your customers are open to that vulnerability, or do you need to have a conversation with them? And
no, I don't think naturally anybody else wants to be vulnerable. I mean, look at social media. Social media is popular because everybody's showing just the part that I want you to see, right?
right.
I mean, we're in a sense we're trained as a society to only show the good moments because that's what gets the great likes. So, no, the natural tendency, and of course, we don't want to be vulnerable because what? We do carry trauma. We carry a track record that, not all the times I was vulnerable that people really, come in and we all came together, but sometimes it was just to even cause more pain.
So how
And
do you get them to be vulnerable?
well, again, I can't get them to be anything. It's going to be according, what do you want? What do you want from your organization? Because it's gonna take, I mean, I don't want to, necessarily go to the gym every day, but if I want to be able to run that marathon, I'm going to have to go to the gym. I'm going to have to train. And it's the same thing. You may not want to. We're all free. I cannot make you. But what do you want? And if you want to be able to have honest conversations, feedback, and make a safe space for everybody, it's going to take vulnerability. So that's a gap we would have to close. That we would start there. How do we become more vulnerable? And it's not go from zero and never share anything. Like I don't even share what kind of tea I like to talking about what really bothers me in communication. We're not going to do that. You take it one step at a time. That is one of the things I learned in the hospital bed. I mean, there were so many things out of my control. And as a kid, a kid wants to go out in the playground, wants to run.
Right.
Well, I lived about 10 years tied to a bed. Literally, I had to be tied. If I got up, it would make my heart go into lethal rhythms and they couldn't bring it down. So I had to learn to live still and be able to still make progress in a place where I couldn't technically do much. And that's actually where my book Hustle with Heart, the 52 mini shifts came from, because there were mini shifts. I realized that although I was bound physically, what was never bound was my mind. There was nothing that could bind that. I could bind that. So when I realized that, even as a kid, I started focusing on that and I started looking at, well, what can I engage with? I still, as a kid, being curious, I engage with the buttons in my bed. Sometimes it's going up, going down, There was like my merry-go-round. But silly things. There was something that I could find in the day, the buttons, the remote, the way that the nurse, the handwriting or whatever they put on there. There were different things that I could still engage with my world. And I would say that to the leaders as well. Even in vulnerability, you become vulnerable, you become curious when you start engaging with your world. And that curiosity is going to bring about, because you have to start asking questions and you realize, I don't really know much about that. And you know what? That in itself, awareness that I don't know, opens yourself up for that vulnerability and that engagement. So that's where actually I recommend the leaders to go.
Tell us a little bit more about your book.
Well, 52 mini shifts is exactly that. I talk about the heart, which is a framework. So heart is the values-based leadership. These are values that not only are, good to have, they're not like the cute ones that we put on the wall, but really these are skills as leaders that I got to see firsthand, not only in the hospital, but throughout my life, and really having been able to be around so many leaders globally, that not only are leaders that are successful, but are be able to sustain, in this sense, significance. So the heart framework is hope, empowerment, results, accountability, and trust. Oh, sorry, I said accountability, results, and trust. Misspell heart. Accountability, results, and trust, so that we can grow in them, because there's no point in having values if you can't grow in them. So in that book, I make them that tangible. But how do we grow in them? That's where the BEAT method comes in. And the BEAT method is a simple alignment method. Again, starts with believe, engaging with your world, taking a small action, whatever that is, and looking at a transformation. Does the transformation match my belief? So it's a consistent alignment mechanism. It's basically a feedback loop. So I get back to what I really not only am purpose and created for, but really so I can see the transformation of who I really want to become. So it's the internal alignment that allows the leaders to be able to have these type of conversations.
And presumably you also talk to your leaders about the alignment of the organization.
Yes.
Right? Because they have to be aligned, that the organization also has to be aligned. So talk to me a little bit about that part.
So that's the beat is for the individual alignment, which is called the heartbeat, right? Every organization has many heartbeats. We have different people. But for the organization, I have what I call the heart core. So the core has all this heartbeat. So core is for cultivate, optimize, reach, and elevate. And in the cultivate, what happens again is you're talking about the mission, the vision, the shared values that we have. What is it that's tying us together? What are we doing together? What is a culture? What are we developing here? So there's things that happen in cultivate, but then there's the optimization, where once we've gotten a bit of, that self-efficacy in there, well, how do we take it up a notch? How do we make it better? This goes to your scalability aspect, right? But we can't optimize what we haven't seen, we haven't validated yet. So in optimize, that's what we're looking is what is the data, how we've been doing, what has been working, how do we make it more effective, efficient here? There is the question of processes, the systems, testing the systems to see where we can have opportunities for optimization. And then comes the reach. reach becomes that feedback loop, because once you're optimizing, you're testing, you're doing all that, you need to make sure you're catching what your customers are receiving, both internally and externally, which takes you to elevate. Elevate being that thought leader, being that solution for a world that's consistently changing, understanding that your customers' world changed last night and the solutions that they need are not going to be what worked 10 years ago, but you have to actually be the guide where you're staying ahead so you can help the people that are with you. So that's what the elevate's all about. So it's cultivate, optimize, reach, and elevate. And that is an external, the organizational alignment that goes along with the beat, the believe, engage, act, transform. Internally, every person doing that. And that's how we come together.
When a customer reaches out to you, what's going on in the organization? Why are they calling you? What are they seeing that they say, I need to talk to an expert?
The people have left, like especially like a key leader has left or is about to leave, and they don't necessarily have somebody to replace them. They don't necessarily even know, like, I don't even know all they did. That's usually where the conversation lands. Everything they thought that the person did was not exactly what they thought the person did. So that's usually where it comes in, the conversation. Too many meetings. We're spending all this time having a meeting after meeting after meeting. We're still not getting the work done, and we're losing opportunities for be able to raise income. That's usually the other one. Usually that one's masked by a communications problem. Just like the person leaving is masked by, it's like everybody's going into their different seasons, different things, which could be, obviously. But not having the successor right after also tells me there's something in the overall growth of the organization. So those are usually the immediate reasons: lack of clarity, conflicting priorities, leadership, basically the lack of decision making, or what is perceived as decision making. That usually I would hear a leader say, they have no initiative, because they're considering initiative as a decision. They made a decision, right, and they operated in that. So I have a lot of, everything is on me, because there's no decisions being made, So that's another one. That's where I'm brought in. Decision making a lot of times is not because they're not capable. Obviously, that's why they were hired. They may have a whole reason of all that part, but there's not, right, the processes, the systems, but most importantly, authority may not have been delegated, although the responsibility was.
Is there one thing that stands out that you have to tell leaders, you need to stop this now, in order for us to continue? Something that breaks that cycle? Is there at least a theme of things that stand out that leaders need to stop that they're doing to cause problems?
Oh, well, yeah. Well, expecting for everybody else to do it, but they're exempt from doing it. Like, right. Oh, that's great. I'm so glad you mentioned that. I'm so glad you brought that up. It's good for them to do it. I've been telling them all this the whole time, and not really seeing it that they're really the leaders. And although we can all make a change. Honestly, like, if you want to make a change right now, we all can. The question is, can you sustain the change? The change, whatever it is that I bring to the table, whatever it is that somebody else brings to the table, the question is, how is it going to be sustained? Consultants come in, consultants can go, coaches can come in, clients can come in. The one who stays consistent there is the leader, is the owner, is the CEO. So if there's problems happening that keep on rising up, and you have a common denominator, it's time to look at the common denominator. So I would say, let's look at what are the common denominators that are going on here, because that has to be the guiding light.
So Hanna, one of the big things that I see in my customers is insufficient succession planning.
Yes.
Everyone thinks that, the day that I die, I'm going to leave my business to my kids. The kids don't want the business. If there's a partnership, everything's going to be great. There's a lot of work that needs to go into succession planning in any business. How are you seeing your customers from a succession planning perspective, and what do you recommend to them?
Well, I recently started liking baseball because of my husband. And one of the things that I learned was the bench, especially when it comes to pitching. uh, the thing about it with the bench is, they already have these people that are ready to come in. And although you have a great leader, right? You have a great pitcher, which is a startup, the one who has, D1 that may actually carry the entire thing. So that to me is the founder. A lot of times for the organization, that pitcher is the founder, but realizing that sometimes there's opportunities because tired or have to go or somewhere else, they're calling upon the bench. And according to the bench is whatever they need to accomplish at that time. So I would say, as far as the succession plan, even when you're starting, looking at the different people that fit in or putting them in their strength zone for the different times that the founder, the director, they have to step away, even any key position. And start just like the bench does. You start testing, but they don't just get out there when they're like, oh, it's your turn. No, they're warming up, they're going out there, they're playing. You even put them to play also in opportunities where they're not big stakes, right? They might be winning, like that's when you start testing out the bench. So I will say, utilizing the same thing, you gotta give the leaders the opportunity to be able to test, even at those times that, hey, let's give them this one project. It's not your life or death one, because that's usually where a lot of times people don't delegate. Right. So understanding where's being intentional and finding opportunities for these leaders to warm up, to be able to start now showing and even understanding their own gaps, because they won't be able to grow unless we know we all have gaps. I mean, all of us, they won't know their gaps. So, and then when it's time to go, like, hey, this is my successor. Well, you don't want to throw them in cold. You want to make sure that they have an understanding of what needs to be accomplished at that time, understanding those times where, hey, this is the one where you don't have to go as hard because we're winning by a landslide, versus the one that every single little thing is depending on this one, right? So even understanding, getting the feel for what the organization is, because it's not just a matter of task. So when you talk about succession, and the reason why a lot of times our people seem like irreplaceable, because we each all bring things, because it's not just the resume, it's the knowledge, it's understanding the environment. What does it feel like? What is a moment of pressure for our business? What is a moment for not some, where we can take this time for practice? Where are the cycles of the cycles of where we're getting our money from? So those are things, basically, as a leader, not only getting practice in task, but getting practice in the rhythm of the organization.
And there has to be a lot of alignment across the leadership, the strategy. Mm-hmm. There has to be that cohesiveness throughout the organization.
Yeah.
And that takes work.
Oh, absolutely. And the alignment, when we're talking about succession, well, is how does decision happen? How is the decision-making progress? The process that is happening here, because the decision-making process a lot of times lives in the founder or lives in the second key person or officer. So understanding what is their thought pattern, so we can really put what's priority, so that we can pass not only the task, hey, do this task, but really what is the decision-making process in this task. And that's where alignment really comes into play.
One of the best descriptions or definitions of culture is that was shared with me is how we make decisions. Mm-hmm. And when I first heard that, it was like, that's not quite the culture, but the more I thought about it, it makes total sense, because it is that alignment. It is. It is who we are as an organization.
Correct.
That really is the culture, not the parties that we have and charities that we donate to.
The signs on the wall.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's true, honestly, on that, because think about it, culture to an organization is character to a person. You don't make any decisions outside of your body, outside of yourself. Same thing. Every decision that is made in an organization happens inside the culture. That decision also will tell you what is the real culture here, because that's what's dictating it. The culture is dictating the decision.
So Hanna, what are two or three things that you can tell our listeners, in terms of suggestions that they could implement, today or this week to help transform their business?
Well, first of all, is taking that breath. I know when I was going through, scaling, pressure testing, and really in the way to healing is understanding what well was versus what not well was. And for that, I had to take a breath. I had to pause. I had to see, what does wellness look like? And I think just as important as understanding what causes pressure is understanding what causes wellness. So I would say that both personally and also to an organization, because we're talking about healthy working environments. The second part is looking at where your time is going. There has to be time both, yes, for optimizing where you're working on processes. And I know a lot of organizations are talking about that right now with AI and technology, but you cannot optimize if you don't know the culture yet. Anything that you optimize is going to amplify the good things and the not so good things. So being ready for that. So I would say, two is really know what is the true culture that we just talked about of the place, so you can then move on to optimizing. And the third thing is alignment. Again, there's a purpose for us as human beings. We're beautiful, the fact that we're alive today. There's not only purpose in what we do, but there's also fulfillment in what we do. And having the opportunity with alignment to receive that fulfillment back, which is the same thing for organizations living out their missions, being able to perform them according to their values, but also the fulfillment, the impact that those organizations have, and being able to catch those and amplify those as well.
Hanna, I'm going to have all your contact information in the show notes, but tell our listeners how they can get a hold of you.
Absolutely. Well, you can find me on LinkedIn under Hanna Bauer, and also my website, HEARTnomics.com, just like you hear it, HEARTnomics.com. And in there, I have a complimentary alignment test for heart leadership. So your listeners are more than welcome to take that and take a pulse check on their heart leadership.
That's awesome. So thank you all for tuning in to today's episode of From Stuck to Scaled. A special thanks to Hanna for sharing her inspiring journey as a heart disease survivor and her insights on the rhythm of resilience in leadership. Remember, just as our bodies have a pulse, so do our organizations, and it's up to our leaders to ensure that pulse is healthy and strong. As we navigate challenges and change, let's not forget the importance of leading with vulnerability, asking the right questions, and keeping our goals clear and aligned. If you found value in today's discussion, please be sure to share this episode with fellow entrepreneurs and leaders who might benefit from Hanna's wisdom. Until next time, keep your heart in your leadership, and let's continue to grow together. Thank you so much, Hanna.
Thank you.
You've been listening to From Stuck to Scaled, Growth Strategies for Small and Mid-Sized Businesses, produced by Opticution, LLC. For more information, tools, and resources, check out our website, www.opticution.com/podcast.